So welcome to Night Hacking. I'm Yolande Poirier from Oracle Technology Network, and I'm here today with Lee Atchison.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being interviewed.
Sure.
So Lee, you are an expert on architecture and how to scale it and how to move from the microservices infrastructure to from a regular infrastructure to microservices.
To service-based architectures. Yeah, I spent 7 years at Amazon, and I helped them move to a service-based architecture, and I've spent a lot of time talking about service-based architectures and helping companies, including New Relic, moving to service-based architectures.
Okay. So we talk a lot about microservices. So what do you think about it, or how do you think developers should think about microservices?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of hype around microservices right now, and I think the important thing that I like developers to think about is services are great and they help in a lot of places, but don't just buy into the make services small, make them as small as possible, and therefore your code will be simpler. Because what happens is as you build your services arbitrarily small, you end up with so many of them. The complexity of the interconnections becomes actually your biggest problem. What I advocate instead is to find the right boundaries where you build your service boundaries and plan for them. And some of your services are going to be quite large, some of them are going to be quite small. Size isn't the issue. It's to make sure that the services are built and designed at the right proper boundaries. And that's the really important thing.
Okay, so how do you decide on those boundaries? I mean,
Sure.
How do you bundle together on one service?
Yeah, there's some really good guidelines you want to decide where your service boundaries are. And basically, what I like to think of is you want to group specific functionality together. You want to co-locate services that use the same data set in the same services. You want to reduce traffic between services as much as possible. So you want to make sure that your services are designed in such a way that that they're intelligently self-contained, yet and that the dependencies they have are natural dependencies. And there's a set of steps that you can go through that I talk about in my book that will help you walk through that process.
So, and do you look at the updates? I mean, how you will update those modules, and that's how you should put this prioritization of what you put in one microservice? Or
I think
I want the steps, basically.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
what I'm trying to.
So I think the real important thing is to make sure your data is self-contained and consistent, and then make sure your team is designed around being able to support that service.
Okay, yeah.
So one of the things I talk about is your team, and by a team I'm talking about a set of developers of around 4 to 6 people. So a small team, not the large idea of a team, but if you're a small team, each service should be owned by a single team, and that single team should have complete and total ownership and responsibility for all aspects of that service. A team can support multiple services, but a single service should be sized appropriately so that only one team is necessary to manage it. Okay. The ownership is really what's important there, and then that allows you to build SLAs at the service boundary that the service owners are responsible for, and their job is to make sure those SLAs are maintained. And once you have defined SLAs at your service boundaries, then users and other services that need that service know what they can depend on, what they can't depend on, and that allows them to meet their SLAs to their consumers as well. So by having well-defined boundaries, self-consistent data, and strong team ownership, you're able to build your system a lot better.
Okay, and so what about scalability? So how do you scale? I mean, so do you then create? So how do you go about it?
So you can scale. Then you make scaling decisions at the individual service level.
Okay.
And so it shouldn't matter where your service is located, other than for whatever other practical networking reasons you need within your application. But you want to make sure that you can you build it in such a way that it can naturally horizontally scale. So keep your data contained for a given service within a single data store that is is itself scalable to the level that you need it to be. The service instances themselves then should be completely stateless other than for caching or anything else that's needed, so you can horizontally scale as easily as possible. You should build all your services that way, or as many of them as you can.
Okay.
One of the questions I get asked a lot about scaling is, how do I scale, how do I build a scalable data store for all of my data? And what I find a lot of people do is they lump all their data into a single thing, and they say, I have all this data, and because this has to be self-consistent, all of it has to be self-consistent. I can't use eventual consistency, I have to use a strong consistency model because of these 3 use cases. And what I tell people is, no, think about your data, separate out the data that really requires a strong consistency model, really requires tight integration. Separate that out. Everything else can be eventually consistent, can be stored into a different sort of data store. And what most applications will find is that 90-95% of their data doesn't have the strong consistency requirements that some of the data has. So take that small amount of data that needs a strong consistency, use an appropriate data store for that.
Okay.
That has not as quite as good of a scalability model, but it's a lot smaller data store, so it should be easier in general to scale that service because it's doing a lot less in general. But the vast majority of data, which doesn't have to have a strong consistency, then there's a whole bunch of options available for you for scaling that data store that doesn't require you to maintain strong consistency. And so by making that separation, you're able to scale a lot better.
Okay. Anything else you want to say before I say, read the book?
Read the book, yeah. No, I think the big thing about scaling that I'd like to talk a lot about is availability, because the place where you run into scalability problems shows up primarily as an availability issue. So think about availability, understand your availability needs for your application. And the second thing is risk management, and that is understand where your vulnerabilities are, know what areas of your application are well constructed, not well constructed, understand where you need to put your effort in, understand the risk of spending effort here versus here on improving your application, and that'll help improve your availability and ultimately your scalability.
Okay, so that's the book. The book to read for scalability and architecture. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and talking to us. So
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.